Honorable Speaker, the 2025 debt management strategy aims to optimize access to external concessional borrowing and undertake liability management to minimize the costs and risks in Kenya's debt portfolio. Honorable Speaker, the reason why external borrowing is relatively cheaper than domestic debt is due to the large share of concessional loans from multilateral lenders such as World Bank and our development partners. Indeed, 54% of the total external debt portfolio is concessional, and that significantly contributes to the sustainability of Kenya's debt. Honorable Speaker, during our review, we noted that the external commercial borrowing is relatively expensive compared to concessional loans, as previously mentioned. To address this issue, the 2025 midterm debt management strategy proposes to reduce the share of commercial loans by taking various measures, including paying off some of the most expensive loans and exploring cheaper debt instruments such as our green bonds. Honorable Speaker, following the review of the 2025 midterm debt strategy, the committee observed that the government will borrow Kenya shillings 831.1 billion, which is equivalent to the fiscal deficit in the 2025 budget policy statement. The amount to be borrowed will be sourced from domestic and external sources at a ratio of 65% and 35% respectively. We were informed by the National Treasury that it is important to have a mix of different types of debt so that you spread your risk from financial shocks. Honorable Speaker, the committee also made the key following recommendations, and which I urge members to support. We had non-financial recommendations and financial recommendations. On the non-financial recommendations that we are requesting the House to support are the following. One, to meet the Public Finance Management Act 2020, they will reduce it to the requirement of the PFM Act to 55% by the year 2028, and they seek the support of this House as they take the steps to ensure that that happens. Two, the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury and Economic Planning, the Governor of Central Bank, the Controller of Budget should fully automate the withdrawal of debt service payments from the Consolidated Fund by the 31st of May 2025 and submit that report to this House, the National Assembly, within 15 days. Three, that to strengthen the financial controls and ensure accurate and timely public debt statistics and enhance decision-making for greater transparency and accountability, the National Treasury should integrate the public debt management system with the Integrated Financial Management System, also referred to as IFMIS, by the 31st of May 2025, and again submit this report to the National Assembly within 15 days of implementation. Four, that to mitigate the growing risk of domestic debt and interest payments, and to reduce the tendency of the government borrowing funds held by public entities, the National Treasury should deploy a Treasury single account, also referred to as TSA, for all ministerial departments, parastatals, with public funds by the 1st of July 2025. This will be revolutionary in our financial management, governance, and transparency and accountability, also in our public debt management. And this is the first time this is happening. Of course, we were informed that many MDAs and parastatals do not want this system because of its great transparency and accountability. 5, we also recommended that to improve the transparency and accountability in anticipated increase in domestic borrowing, the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury and Economic Planning should do the following within 60 days. 1, form a working committee to establish the criteria for assessing the effectiveness of utilization of borrowed funds by ministries, departments, and agencies. And 2, to establish a register of government securities pursuant to Section 55 of the Public Finance Management Act. And 3, to create a record in the debt register of the details on the utilization of the borrowed funds, including the set of projects funded from the proceeds of infrastructure bonds. The other recommendation, 6, is that the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury and Economic Planning should establish an interagency committee, including representatives from the Central Bank and the Controller of Budget, to review the public debt procurement process, debt utilization, and submit a report to the National Assembly by the 31st of May, 2025. And the 7th recommendation is that the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury and Economic Planning, should establish an interagency committee, including representatives from the Central Bank and the Controller of Budget, to review our debts and report quarterly to the National Assembly. And 8, which is the last of our non-financial recommendations, is that the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury and Economic Planning shall report and seek approval from the National Assembly on any variation to the approved borrowing mix in 2025 medium-term debt management strategy, which is what we have submitted now. The financial recommendations are as follows, which we are also seeking that this House supports the recommendations by the committee. That the fiscal target for the medium term is approved and set at 4.3% of GDP for the financial year 2025-2026, and 3.5% of GDP for the financial year 2026-2027, and 3.2% of GDP for the financial year 2027-2028, in line with the fiscal consolidation path. And that the country's borrowing strategy is approved at 35% for net external borrowing and 65% for domestic borrowing, as contained in the 2025 medium-term debt strategy. And Honorable Speaker, finally, let me thank the House through you, Honorable Speaker, for giving the Liaison Committee the responsibility of considering the medium-term debt management strategy. It was a unique opportunity for chairpersons of various committees to appreciate the state of the economy regarding the constrained physical space, especially as it affects various programs that require financing in all sectors. And like I said earlier, Honorable Speaker, the Liaison Committee were very diligent and worked up to midnight last night and up to 10 p.m. the night before. And as Honorable Speaker, I thank you and I beg to move and request Honorable Martha Wangare, MP for Gilgil, and Vice Chairperson to second.
The Honorable Martha Wangare.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to second this motion and this report, this medium-term debt management strategy, Mr. Speaker. And I also want to join my chair in appreciating the members of the Liaison Committee Mr. Speaker, you realize this was not a usual kind of thing. Many of these chairs actually appear before the Budget and Appropriation Committee, but for the first time, they were able...
Order, members, order. The Honorable Murugara, the Honorable Tindi Mwale, the Honorable Indikiri, the Honorable Maklap. Could you all take your seats? Could we consult in low tone so that we could hear the Honorable Member contributing?
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the protection. I was saying, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, the chairs of departmental committees were able to interact directly with the MTDS, and more importantly, engage stakeholders on it. And Mr. Speaker, what that gave us is a unique opportunity to have a dashboard experience in terms of looking at not only your committee, but also the general overview in the country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have also taken time to learn a lot of terms that we didn't know. I personally have realized, I used to think ATM is just automated teller machine. I've realized it has another new meaning, that it is the average time for maturity for debt, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, what came out specifically, there are many issues, and I know my chair has enumerated most of them, but I will just touch on some of the issues that were raised, especially...
Honorable members, what you are discussing is a very important topic. I would wish that we hear the member in silence.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a lot of excitement. I would think it's because of the previous motion that has passed in the floor. So, Mr. Speaker, I will continue and say some of the issues that we have raised, we took time to meet with different stakeholders. We met with the Comptroller of Budget. We met with the Office of the Auditor General. We met the Ministry of Treasury until late last night. We also met and received a memoranda from other stakeholders, including, Mr. Speaker, civil society that wrote to us. We also got a written memoranda from the Central Bank of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, the issue of our debt has been a matter of discussion for obvious reason, because it also puts a strain in our management of our revenue versus expenditure, Mr. Speaker. The reason why it is heavy on our budget, Mr. Speaker, is because it has also risen over the years. Right now, we are speaking of 67%. We are speaking of actually 67.5 to the GDP, Mr. Speaker, against a recommendation and something that is actually put in law under PFM Act of 55% plus 5%, but with a date of 2028, Mr. Speaker. So one of the issues that we raised to the Treasury was to ask, what is your timeline in terms of ensuring that our debt is manageable and has come down to the recommended percentage? Mr. Speaker, the CS Treasury was very clear that it has actually been on a declining, and we are now at 65.7, but very soon, and he actually gave by 2028, we should be looking not at 55, but at 53%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of fiscal deficit, that is the difference between government revenue and spending in any fiscal year, has been approved this year as at 4.3% of GDP, and it is estimated to be at 3.5% of GDP 2026, 2027, and eventually at 3.2% in 2027-2028. Mr. Speaker, the issue of balance of this debt in terms of internal and external borrowing was another matter that was very critical. It has been actually proven that we are actually relying more on domestic borrowing than external borrowing, Mr. Speaker. And I know the external borrowing has been termed to be higher and more expensive. That is why you'll see the rates will be different, Mr. Speaker, because during our review, we were able to realize that the average interest charged on domestic debt is actually 13.2% relative to the interest rate on external debt, which is 3.7%. That's becoming substantially more expensive. But, Mr. Speaker, the reason why external borrowing is relatively cheaper than domestic is also due to the large share of concessional loans from multilateral lenders, Mr. Speaker, such as the World Bank and our development partners. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, 54% of the total external debt portfolio is concessional, and that significantly contributes to the sustainability of the Kenya's debt. The other issues that members raised, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of the right application of debt, Mr. Speaker. What does that mean? What it means, Mr. Speaker, is that there is no single country I have had in the world that does not have debt. But the issue of where does this debt go is what Kenyans and many of our voters are actually keen about. They want to be sure if you are borrowing to build roads, which roads are these? If you are borrowing to do dams, which dams are these? And Mr. Speaker, that is why one of the recommendations that we have put to the Treasury is that it should, in the next very few days, Mr. Speaker, form a working committee to assess the effective utilization of these borrowed funds. And this, Mr. Speaker, will be a cross-cutting team by ministries, MDAs, departments, Mr. Speaker, and also the Comptroller of Budget, so that we are able to incorporate how well we are able to monitor these debts, Mr. Speaker. The other recommendation, Mr. Speaker, will be that Treasury will be expected to record in the debt register the details of this utilization, Mr. Speaker. And that interagency team is supposed to do exactly that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by our engagement to the Comptroller of Budget, a very brilliant lady, Mr. Speaker, we were able to find out that some of our neighboring countries are doing very well in terms of managing their debt and even making this information available, Mr. Speaker, because our Constitution and Article 35 actually ensures that you are able to get this information very easily. So it shouldn't be so hard to know how much are we owing to which country and in what terms, Mr. Speaker. And the Comptroller of Budget, Mr. Speaker, in appearing before us, was able to give us a very interesting, in fact, she had just come from Tanzania, and she told us that in the United Republic of Tanzania, it was observed that the country has implemented an advanced and fully functional automated debt management systems integrated with cash management system. Mr. Speaker, I think sometimes as a country we get jittery in terms of getting efficiency, because I think we have the brains, we have the know-how, and we know what to do, Mr. Speaker. That we should have an automated debt management integrated together with IFMIS, Mr. Speaker. This shouldn't be so hard to ensure efficiency and to ensure that we are able to move properly so that we can account for our debt shilling by shilling. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that she told the committee is that Tanzania has also achieved a single treasury account. And Mr. Speaker, what a single treasury account means, it means that you are able to track the monies better instead of having multiple accounts across the place, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know there has been debate, especially on the 222, that is the e-citizen, Mr. Speaker, and the one pay bill that is for government, Mr. Speaker. But that, Mr. Speaker, is a medium. It is not the account. The issue would have to one single treasury account, then we'll be able to track our monies and be able to see exactly where our debt is going. Mr. Speaker, I know time is limited and I see my light is on, but I would like to also appreciate our Parliamentary Budget Office, Mr.
1 more minute.
Yes, just to wind up. Our PBO, Mr. Speaker, that is Parliamentary Budget Office, is quite key. And Mr. Speaker, even when we were doing these appearances, we were able to get staff members from Treasury, from the Parliament of Zimbabwe, actually benchmarking to find out how we do it, Mr. Speaker. So I want to appreciate all the teams, and Mr. Speaker, appreciate these members that sat long hours to ensure that we are here today. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the additional time. I second.
Thank you. Honorable members, I now do propose the question that this House adopt the report of the Liaison Committee on its consideration of the 2025 medium-term debt management strategy, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, the 5th March 2025, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 15(4) of the Public Finance Management Act 2012, and standing Order Number 232A, Paragraph 7 and 8, A, approves the 2025 medium-term debt management strategy, and B, makes the policy and financial resolutions contained in the schedule to the order paper. No, you don't catch up there of the speaker by doing that. You know that very well. You catch there of the speaker by logging in, and I will follow the table that is here. The first person on this table is the Honorable George Gitonga Murugara. Are you on this? Murugara, are you on this? But the majority leader, I cannot see your card, majority leader.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr.
This chance, Honorable Murugara, your chance was lost because you're busy. So you'll allow the majority leader to go first, then you'll go after.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for your indulgence. The Deputy Speaker is saying I never have a card. I usually have a card, only that because of these crowds that were crowding here, I don't know who took the card. Honorable Speaker, I rise to support this motion on the adoption of the medium-term debt management strategy. And particularly, Honorable Speaker, I want to speak to a few things, policy propositions or policy resolutions that the committee has noted, which I fully concur with. And one is on automation, Honorable Speaker. And if you look at some of the policy resolutions, they say that the Cabinet Secretary from the National Treasury, the Governor Central Bank, and the Controller of Budget should fully automate the withdrawal of debt service payments from the Consolidated Fund by the 31st of May this year and submit a report to the National Assembly. Honorable Speaker, I want to support that because part of the problems why we cannot get accurate data on our debt indebtedness as a country is because we have not fully automated our debt management processes. Therefore, if you look at that together with the other proposal there, that in order to strengthen financial controls, we ensure accurate and timely debt management statistics and enhance decision-making for greater transparency and accountability. And again, they're asking that the National Treasury must or should integrate the public debt management system with the IFMI system, or the Integrated Financial Management System, again by 31st of May this year, and submit a report to the National Assembly within 15 days after the integration of the two systems. Honorable Speaker, it's become customary for this House to pass policy resolutions for enactment or for implementation by the National Treasury, and most of which they tend to ignore. And I want to tell them, Honorable Speaker, from these policy resolutions, there is reason and need to automate all our systems. And the integration of the IFMI system and the debt management system is critical in ensuring that we have accurate, timely data on our total indebtedness as a country. And at the same time, Honorable Speaker, in that the automation of the debt payment systems from the Consolidated Fund Services, so that at any one particular time at the touch of a button, any officer in Treasury, at the request of the National Assembly or indeed any other oversight authority, can be able to tell how much has been paid out of our consolidated fund towards debt settlement, how much do we expect to pay in terms of the interest that we are servicing for debt, Honorable Speaker, and all these things will be possible with automation. Honorable Speaker, the third thing that I want to speak to is a question of the single treasury account. And again, I note, Honorable Speaker, the committee has proposed that in order to mitigate the growing risk of domestic debt interest payments and to reduce the tendency of the government borrowing funds held by public entities, the National Treasury should deploy the single treasury account for all MDAs, parastatals, and public funds by 1st of July 2025. Honorable Speaker, allow me to speak to this in relation also to a directive that His Excellency the President gave during the State of the Nation address last year. Because previously, I think former President...
Honorable Kangogo, I will not tire reminding you, I came to this House on 28th March 2013. You and the person speaking now. You can't be between him and the Speaker when he's contributing. You can't be.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Pukosa says Honorable Kangogo is very mobile today. I do not know whether there are cows that have disappeared somewhere in Marakwet East. Honorable Speaker, I was saying, I think during the last parliament, the then President Uhuru Kenyatta, at one point also directed that the National Treasury does actualize the single treasury account, and this never happens. Now it has been done through a resolution of the House that National Treasury has no choice but to actualize the single treasury account. Honorable Speaker, His Excellency the President was saying during the State of the Nation address, directed that by the 30th of April this year, the question of public procurement must be sorted out through e-procurement and ensuring that e-procurement, because of the interruptions. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. 1 minute for the interruptions. I was saying that directive by the President has about another 1.5 months to go. The National Treasury must also, in line with the directive by the President, ensure that e-procurement becomes a reality at the end of this first quarter. And by the time the National Treasury is bringing their annual estimates at the 31st or 30th or thereabout of April, they must also report to the House whether they have made the e-procurement a reality, as they report by May 31st on the automation of the IFMI system and the debt management system, Honorable Speaker, and also the single treasury account, because if there is a place that has become an avenue for corruption, is the question of funds being held by MDAs, ministries, and state agencies going to solicit for bribes, Honorable Speaker, so that they can bank in particular banks. And that is where you find many MDAs, you find them queuing, bank managers queuing in state departments and parastatals. Many parastatals are holding huge amounts of money, Honorable Speaker, in bank accounts, earning small interest. And the same money then is given to government in terms of domestic public debt. There is no reason why we should be borrowing. Government should be borrowing its own money, and we must ensure that the single National Treasury account becomes a reality, so that even when we borrow money, Honorable Speaker, we are not borrowing our own money. There is absolutely no reason why an MDA should bank in a commercial bank an interest of 4-5%, then we go back as government and borrow the same money from the market at 11-12%, Honorable Speaker. It is not right, and we must ensure it does not happen. And I say this, I hope the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury, the Honorable John Buddy, who is a former member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee and a former member of this House, is listening to me, and the PS Kipto. They must actualize the single treasury account. The automation that the House is resolving through these policy resolutions must not just be talk resolutions here, they must be actualized. And may I remind them, as the President directed, by the end of the first quarter, we expect to see e-procurement in place, as was directed during the State of the Nation address. I beg to support.
No, before you sit, what will happen to them if they don't do it? Because this is not the first time we have this single account. What will happen to them if they don't do it?
Honorable Speaker, it is not up to me to say what will happen to them if they do not do. But if the appointing authority has publicly pronounced himself,
no. This is now going to be a House
and
resolution.
the House resolutions,
yes,
Honorable Speaker, are in writing. These resolutions are given to the National Treasury upon approval by the House. When they receive them, they will know they can start counting days to the 31st of May and July for the actualization of the single treasury account. If they do not do it, then they will know that we have teeth to bite. Those who have refused and threatened members of parliament by the roadsides have seen what happens.
Rugara, now you can have your chance.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me also to rise and support the adoption of the report of the Liaison Committee on its consideration of the medium-term debt management system, which we have dealt with this afternoon. Honorable Speaker, it is extremely important for this House to know that it is supposed to control the debt of the country, and that in place it should be a management system which is easy to comprehend and which is understandable to the House. The problem we have in the country is that many people think we borrow money, we do not account for it, much of it is looted, as a result of which everybody, including those who are not born, are debt-ridden. It is not true to say so, because when we listened to the officers from the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, actually there are systems regarding our debt system, and unfortunately these are not known to the country. They are also even not known to members of parliament, as a result of which we are all in limbo. And therefore, as we start this constitutional mandate we have of maintaining the debt system of the country, it is important to implore the National Treasury to ensure that we actually have the necessary paperwork that is understandable and comprehensible as we deal with our debt system. Allow me kindly to touch on one of the issues that arose regarding our debts when we had these meetings with the Cabinet Secretary and the National Treasury. We were convinced that possibly the money we borrow, most of it goes to recurrent expense and not to development. And this is the reason why there is a hue and cry from the country as to why we are borrowing and we cannot see development. It was explained to us that if you borrow money and you do not use it prudently, then later on you would have two problems. Number one, the debt would be unpopular. Number two, you would not see the sense of repaying. And this is the reason why some countries default on their debt obligations. Therefore, it is vitally important for the country to know that yes, we are incurring debts, both domestic and external. But the purpose of those debts is to ensure that the country is better off than where it is. We posed one question: are there countries in this world that are debt-free? Because we felt maybe once upon a time in future, Kenya would be a debt-free country. The specialists who are economists and financialists informed us that they are not aware of any country in the world that is debt-free. What they know for sure is even some developed countries are more indebted than developing countries, but they use their monies very prudently. Therefore, to improve transparency and accountability in the anticipated increase of domestic borrowing, the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury should do the following. Number one, within 60 days, form a working committee to establish criteria for assessing effective utilization of borrowed money. Number two, record the debt register in details on the utilization of the money so that everybody who wants to know how a debt was spent actually has the information. With those remarks, I beg to support.
The member for Kitui Central.
Yeah, thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, on the onset, I want to start by thanking the Liaison Committee for a job well done. Honorable Speaker, it is always not easy to go through the medium-term debt strategy and come up with recommendations. So I've looked at the report, Honorable Speaker, and it really brings out very important issues in terms of managing our public debt. I would really want to focus on about three issues, Honorable Speaker, which have been captured in the report. The first one, Honorable Speaker, is the issue of the ratio being above 55, as approved by this House. Honorable Speaker, the intention was that by 2028, the government, through fiscal consolidation, will be able to bring this ratio back to either 55 or below 55. But the way things are, Honorable Speaker, I can say without any fear of contradiction that if we don't change our attitude, the way we spend our money as a country, we'll never be below 55, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, this is a matter the National Treasury should take seriously, as recommended by this report, Honorable Speaker, that we need to work towards bringing this figure below 55, Honorable Speaker. The second matter, Honorable Speaker, is the ratios in terms of domestic debt and external debt, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, the proposed ratio now is that external debt, Honorable Speaker, 65%, external debt 35%, domestic 65, external 65%, 35%, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, if you look at the statistics in terms of our debt repayment, and more so interest repayment, Honorable Speaker, you realize that the total interest paid per year, and the annual total interest paid, Honorable Speaker, even though the domestic debt is about 51% and external is in total about 49%, in terms of interest payment, Honorable Speaker, 70% of the total interest payment goes to domestic debt, while 30% goes to external debt. In simple terms, we are saying domestic debt is very expensive, Honorable Speaker. And if domestic debt is expensive, Honorable Speaker, the way forward to help this country would be to go slow on domestic debt and increase external debt. We know the challenges the country is facing accessing external debt, Honorable Speaker, but I think it is the responsibility of the Kenya Kwanza government through Treasury to make sure that they do what it takes to reduce domestic borrowing and borrow more from external, Honorable Speaker. In that case, we'll be helping the country. The third point, Honorable Speaker, is the issue of the single treasury account, Honorable Speaker. This has become a song in this republic. In this House, Honorable Speaker, if you remember, me and you, we have served in the Budget Committee for a long time. This is a matter we have been talking for over 10 years, the issue of the single treasury account. I always wonder, why can't we implement this recommendation that we make we make operational the issue of the single treasury account? I see a recommendation talks about by July 1st, 2025. How I wish, Honorable Speaker, this time, this House will enforce that recommendation so that come 1st July 2025, Honorable Speaker, we'll be talking about a single treasury account. There are so many benefits which accrue to that account, Honorable Speaker, and this country will benefit more and in a big way if we went that direction. The last one, Honorable Speaker, is the issue of digitization of our public debt. Honorable Speaker, the other day you saw in the papers that this country has been operating a manual system. Kenya, we pride ourselves to be the regional leader. You have heard the stories about Tanzania, the stories about Uganda. Our neighbors are doing better in terms of managing public debt. And the reason why they have gone digitally, Honorable Speaker, is to reduce issues of corruption. The more we remain on manual system, Honorable Speaker, the more we open wide doors for corruption. How I wish this matter is taken seriously and we move our public debt management to a digital system other than a manual system. With this many remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support this report.
The Honorable Mutunga.
Honorable Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to add my voice to this very important debate in support of the adoption of the Liaison Committee report on the medium-term debt management strategy for 2025-2026. Honorable Speaker, borrowing is a necessity and is not a bad idea, as many have spoken to it. And Honorable Speaker, rarely will you find countries that do not borrow, and even individuals who do not borrow don't grow very fast. So borrowing is really not a bad thing. Honorable Speaker, the borrowing strategy is anchored onto macroeconomic indicators as outlined in the 2025 medium-term debt management strategy. The strategy, Honorable Speaker, is backed by stable inflation rates. Kenya is experiencing about the lowest inflation rates since so many years ago, more than 10 years ago. On the other hand, Honorable Speaker, is also anchored on the robust economic growth, which is averaged at around 5%. It's also anchored on the stable exchange rates, and we can clearly attest to the fact that our exchange rates are not bad. The shilling has strengthened to 128 to 129. It's between 128 and 130, depending on where you exchange. as or seek for exchange. Honorable Speaker, is also anchored onto favorable global economic conditions, which we may not have a lot to do or control, and also the strong revenue collection. This country has been doing very well in terms of revenue collection, and even if we are missing the point at some points, sometimes, Honorable Speaker, we are not missing the point by great percentage. So the medium-term debt management strategy is also strongly based on the planned reduction of the fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit being the difference between what we can be able to support and what we need to look for outside there. So the reduction basically, Honorable Speaker, harnesses the revenue collection, which has been really taken care of, while limiting unproductive, expenditure and growth. Let me very briefly, Honorable Speaker, talk to the fact that this year, or rather the 2025-2026 medium-term debt management strategy proposes that Kenya will borrow 831 billion shillings, which is the deficit between the total that you can collect and our budget, as it were. So the total projected borrowing, Honorable Speaker, at the local level, or rather local level borrowing or domestic borrowing, is projected to be at 65%. Yes, indeed, Honorable Speaker, many of us have spoken to this particular fact. It is expensive to borrow locally. But if you look at the medium-term proposals or projection, Honorable Speaker, it is projecting that Kenya will be supported, rather will be borrowing about 45% externally, which brings down our borrowing to 55%, and that is within the acceptable limits. Honorable Speaker, that reduction is key because it will also come up with a lot of reduction in costs. When we try to examine what we are going to be borrowed from outside, Honorable Speaker, through concessional borrowing, we are looking at borrowing around 14%, semi-concessional borrowing around 3%, and the commercial borrowing out there as 8%. In order for that to happen, Honorable Speaker, certain factors must be put in place. And that is the reason why probably we cannot borrow externally a lot. We need stable exchange rates, which I've talked to. Macro fiscal variables that influence international credit must also be in favor, which will allow Kenya, therefore, to access external debts, Honorable Speaker, at acceptable rates. The better our credit rating is, the more cheaper, the more we can be preferred as a destination, and then the more we can probably, bargain. The medium-term debt management strategy, Honorable Speaker, take into account several challenges which I would like to highlight. One of them, the sovereign credit rating. Kenya right now, under the credit, they have been able to check the future credit rating gives Kenya a positive outlook, which means we are stable. The other one is the external factors out, which basically control such as market volatility, and this has an influence on the timing and the cost of the debt operations themselves. There's also the increased debt servicing cost, which is important. But having noted those challenges, Honorable Speaker, the strategy goes further to give the...
I'll give you 30 seconds. You don't have the whole...
Just to highlight.
You can't highlight. You want to wind down.
Okay, Honorable Speaker, let me wind down by saying that the strategy indicates an approach to this strategy, those challenges. It doesn't just leave challenges or appreciate their challenges. It gives an approach to these challenges. First of all, centralizing a trade to a single trade repository. This will help us to better do price discovery, which will help us in preparedness. The other one is to operationalize the sinking fund. And this, again, is going to help us to reduce risk of borrowing. And finally, the improvement of cash management, which is also going to help us to basically contain the use of overdraft. And overdrafts are normally very expensive. And also, with the other strategy is to sustain fiscal consolidation, which is something that has been happening in this country and is moving towards the reduction of the public debt accumulation. Honorable Speaker, with those very few remarks, I wish to support adoption of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Member for Marakwet East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say I'm a member of the Liaisons Committee, and we had a long discussion with the Treasury on this issue of a medium-term debt management strategy, which is a global practice, Honorable Speaker, on how governments manages their debts. And Mr. Speaker, the debt management in Kenya, for a while, it's been kind of very secretive from the public. And in fact, even many members of this House don't understand how it is being carried out there in Treasury. Mr. Speaker, what we observed is that the country states at this point is at 11.2 trillion, which is equivalent to 65.7% of our GDP, which is way above, it's almost 10% over and above what this House approved, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight some few issues out of that, what the Treasury presented. That the Treasury, they are going to borrow close to 832 billion Kenya shillings. That is to close the deficit for the financial year 2025-2026. They are going to do it in foreign and local debts, Honorable Speaker, in terms of 65% from the local and about 35% from the domestic foreign. Mr. Speaker, there is one issue which came out very clearly. That one, as a country, compared to other jurisdictions like in Tanzania and even in Uganda, number one, as a country, we don't have a debt committee as a country. You will find that our debt is just managed by some few individuals in Treasury. And we told Treasury yesterday there is need for the Treasury, the Central Bank, the Office of Controller of Budget. They must have a team, together with the Office of the Attorney General of Kenya. They must have a team which can manage our debts as a country. And number two, the Honorable Speaker, on the debt procurement. This is money we are borrowing. They must be subjected to a procurement process like any other procurement in the country. We have seen that we have a debt of 832, Honorable Speaker. Let Treasury go out and advertise through a public participation. They need to do a public participation and then procure in an open process. So that when we are saying that we are getting from our local banks, KCB, Equity, and this one, at what rate are we getting? Not that just some few individuals may be looking themselves in a room somewhere in Treasury and agree with some CEOs on how this borrowing is going to be done. Number two, the Honorable Speaker, we are saying that we need to digitize the whole debt management system. We have a very robust system, which is the IFMIS system, Honorable Speaker. The IFMIS system is running as a single government payment system, but it is not integrated with the government payroll system. It is not integrated with the government pensions system. It is not integrated with the procurement system. So we want to see, because this is the one single payment entry, we want to see that the government payroll system is integrated with IFMIS so that to do away with the cost workers. It is integrated with e-procurement for transparency and to stop corruption, and also integrated also with our registration system so that when one dies in employment, when it's automatically removed from IRS system, it automatically also removes from the payroll system. And by so doing, Mr. Speaker, we are going to improve on how we manage our debts as a country. I support.
Thank you. Member for Seme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, this is actually a very good development. Debt management strategy has not always been part of the budget process. And I think I've been in this parliament, and at the first term, actually we didn't even touch it. Second term, now started mentioning, if now it has become a normal and regular part of the budget process, that is as it should be. And I really appreciate the work the Liaison Committee has done. Mr. Speaker, debt is normal. Borrowing is important if we have to grow, we have to have development, we have to improve infrastructure, and in that process, you will actually generate jobs, generate businesses, and so you need the debt. Even at personal level, you can never grow if you do not borrow. But as much as it is necessary, it also has got a risk that if you borrow without a clear way of using that, the money you have borrowed, you will definitely have a problem. It will derail the economy. Therefore, a debt management strategy is a must, which will help us to actually set up thresholds like the debt to GDP ratio. Honestly, if you're borrowing, it must depend on what you are generating. If you have a threshold that guides you on that, that is extremely important, and that's what this does. Mr. Speaker, if you have issues like fiscal deficit to GDP, when you are doing the budget, the gap between what we have and what we want must be related to what we can generate. So if those parameters are guiding us, and that is what the management strategy is, it is actually important. And if you have a threshold between external and domestic debt, we may think that the bigger problem is external debt, but domestic debt is a problem on its own. One, it crowds out borrowing for local businesses. Two, the interests are more expensive. So in the end, it hurts you. So if you have a clear criteria that we do not go beyond this ratio, I think for that, I think we should have this. And now I like the recommendations that actually have come out here, that the automated debt management system. I mean, if you have an automated system, Mr. Speaker, it will definitely reduce graft. It also reduces discretion, because without an automated system, people use their own discretion. People use their own whims. But if you have an automated system, it actually checks them. They have to go against it. And once that is done, somebody will pick it. So having automated system is extremely important. And then if you have this automated system of managing your debt, you have to link it with how you are using the money. So if you have an automated financial management system, like IFMIS that we have, you link it with all aspects of financial expenditure. You link it to the procurement. You link it to human resource. And now you even link it to debt. It is easier at that point to get things done properly. And Mr. Speaker, I like the recommendation of having Treasury single account. It is ridiculous that actually you are borrowing your own money because your other agencies are banking in the banking, and you go to that same bank and you borrow. So you are actually borrowing your money at a higher risk. And so that is something I really think is a good thing. And if we develop, we also establish criteria as recommended here of assessing effective utilization of the borrowed money. That is as it should be. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I support this, and I recommend the committee for coming with this, and it's something which may be part and parcel of our budget process. Thank you.
Okay, Member for Yatta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to the report from the Committee of Liaison. Mr. Speaker, borrowing is not a problem, but the problem is you borrow money and you waste the money. Mr. Speaker, we need to cut wastages and we need to cut theft. Mr. Speaker, Gen Z's talked of austerity measures, Mr. Speaker, and even the president banned politicians from participating in Harambes, Mr. Speaker. And then I was shocked just to see the end of state donating 20 million in a church, Mr. Speaker. And you know very well, being the head of state, we respect him. But it's important.
No, because what's out of order?
Honorable Speaker, we are discussing about the medium-term debt management strategy, which is before the House. And I think the honorable member is digressing and is out of order to bring matters that are irrelevant. I don't know whether the country board, I don't know whether he understands what we are discussing, because what he is actually saying is completely not out of order. It's not relevant to the discussion that is before the House. Could the member be declared to be out of order, Honorable Speaker?
The order. The Honorable Robert, your namesakes.
Yes,
So there is Robert Basil and one is Robert Pukose. The younger Robert, could you relate to us what you are saying with the debt strategy?
You know, Mr. Speaker, I respect my namesake, Honorable Pukose. But what I want to remind him, we are talking of medium-term strategy, and we are talking of public debt management system. So if you talk of wastages, that is part of public debt management. It's within the public debt.
No, what is saying, because the rules say that when a member contributes, they must be relevant.
Yes.
Asking how is Harambee contributions relevant to this to medium debt strategy? That is the issue.
Yeah, that is why I'm trying to explain to him, because when you see the end of, say, contributing, we are trying to see or to explain, could this money be coming from the public debt? Remember, we borrow money. No, wait a minute.
Yeah, you are out of order. On that, you're completely out of order. Please proceed and prosecute your point.
Yes, what I was trying, the emphasis I was trying to put across, Mr. Speaker, and I think members need to listen to me carefully, because whatever we do is for generations to come, not for now. So when we talk of public debt management system, we need to use our money prudently, because why borrow money at the same time misuse the money? When I talk about budget, our budget is never itemized, for example, Mr. Speaker. And that is why accountability is required. When we talk of recommending public debt management system to be digitized, is to promote accountability and transparency on usage of money borrowed, that is public debt. Mr. Speaker, if you look at countries like Japan, the debt ratio to GDP stands at over 200%. The debt ratio to GDP of countries like the United States stand at 98%. Our debt ratio to GDP is at 68%. But the only challenge we have, the money that we borrow, we never use it prudently. And that is the point I'm trying to underscore to members and to the country at large. Mr. Speaker, as members just mentioned, if you look at IMF, they have put the threshold for borrowing money at 55%. That is the public debt for development or for developing countries at 50%. But ours now, Mr. Speaker, we are recommending over 55%. And I think we need to be careful, Mr. Speaker, otherwise we are going to burden Kenyans with the debt, which will be extremely unacceptable, considering now the cost of living is above the roof, Mr. Speaker. So in a nutshell, what I would recommend going forward, and as a way of prudent use of our resources or public management, we need to invest in production, Mr. Speaker, so that we can generate raw materials and also finished products to mitigate importation and to be able to reverse the balance of trade, which is currently negative, Mr. Speaker. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, we need to have, a proper system within Treasury, like having one account within Treasury, so that we see no loopholes where our resources could actually disappear and cause to increased debt where the money is not accounted for and the Kenyans continue to feel the pinch, Mr. Speaker. So it's not that I'm trying to attack or dilute the discussion by making references to some of the accusations or where Kenyans would be agitated and say, for example, their resources is not prudently being used. And that is the reason why even these austerity measures were called for by the agencies, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I submit, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Baringo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I also want to join members who have spoken before me in supporting and wading my thoughts into this medium-term debt management strategy of 2025. Mr. Speaker, this report has come at a very good time, considering that within the period of our elections and now, we are right in the middle of the term. And this, as a report shows the growth that we have so far undertaken through our economy. And the debt, like most members have said, borrowing is not a problem. But the problem is, where do you put the money after borrowing? Because automatically you will end up, pushing yourself and making sure that you're paid back the money you borrowed. In Kenya today, we are grappling on many things, many vices that contribute to wastages, embezzlement of public funds because of lack of proper infrastructures and proper ways of making sure this money is taken care of. And people who handle money, Mr. Speaker, in this case is Treasury, which the report is suggesting that they must, by all means, make sure that they have this single, single source of making sure that all the MDS and all parastatals use one channel to, in their, as a single, I can't see the channel to make sure that they are utilizing the money that is given to them. Mr. Speaker, many times I think we lose and don't understand where exactly is the problem coming from when we say money has been mismanaged. But the people who do this work, specifically Treasury, these are people, and someone told me one day that the people who are actually causing most of the corruption in this country, sometimes people think it's politicians, are the people who sit and draft budget lines and give recommendations on what to be budgeted at the end of the day. And these are the people who decide how much debt is borrowed and where this money goes. And when we take care of that single entry, we will be able to curb most of the problems that we have here today. And the interagency committee, as the report indicated, should be enhanced so that we are able to take care and curb most of the problems and the corruption that is a runaway in most of these ministries. Also, we need to check on the public servants who are career civil servants many times, who have worked in these departments over and over, probably up to 10 years, to 20 years, because there is a possibility of budgeted corruption because of the position they sit. They know how much that is needed, but they are the ones who control the budgets because they know, they draw the budget lines. And this is where, if we, as the National Assembly, we will do our oversight to make sure that this report is acted upon to the latter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Tinderet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this report by the Liaison Committee, where I sit as a member. And more importantly, this report is very important because it actually gives strategies on how to manage our debt on the medium term, the medium-term strategy on debt management. Honorable Speaker, this is a policy document which all countries around the globe have. And it is a policy document that has been initiated as a result of world financial crash occasioned by huge debt burden. Across the globe, and even in our homes, in even institutions, we have debt. And managed debt, Mr. Speaker, is very risky, it is costly, it is expensive. It actually depresses economic development. In effect, this particular document or this particular strategy is very good, and I want to laud the National Treasury for having come up with this particular document. The document looks in detail. One, that we actually need to have a detailed report or quarterly reports on the progress on the fiscal consolidation as outlined in the 2025 budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, the budget policy statement of 2025 is a policy document giving direction on how our budget this financial year, 2025-2026, will go. It gives a direction. This particular document is going to form part of the annexures to that particular report, the budget policy statement. But the report that we have in this particular medium term also gives us how can we manage our debt. Our debt has grown over the years, Mr. Speaker. It has grown from about up to now around 11 trillion shillings. And this one is supposed to actually be managed. In managing debt, Mr. Speaker, we need to know where do we borrow from. If we borrow externally, it means the pool of monies is large, and therefore the loans are going to be cheaper. If we borrow locally, two things will happen. One, we shall be competing with the private and the individuals, and therefore make the interest move up. And two, depress the economic development, the overall development of our economy. By so doing, that's why when you look at this debt, the one we have, at 65 domestic to 35 external, actually it is wrongly skewed. We actually need to have borrowed more externally and borrow less as a government internally, so that we allow wananchi and institutions to borrow within and therefore bring the interest down. Honorable Speaker, we also need to know that why do we borrow? We need to borrow to account. We need to borrow to make sure that any money that we borrow, we need to see it in roads, electricity, we need to see it in terms of health facilities, we need to see it in schools and every other facility that we are borrowing from. That's why in recommendation number 3, the integration of debt management system with the integrated financial management system, or IFMIS, by that 1st May, is very laudable. I want to laud this because any debt that we, any borrowing, let me use that term, any borrowing that we do engage in, first of all, we need to know how it is utilized, areas it is funding, and more importantly, the value for that particular borrowing. So that by the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, it will actually be of value to Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, the other recommendation which I want to really laud is where many of our institutions, for example, the state agencies, do bank in our local banks, then the national government go and borrow their own money. This one we need to stop. And I want to laud the National Treasury for actually coming out very clearly on this. And it has been recommended that the National Treasury and the central bank should ensure that we ensure that that particular item be actually stopped or be actually looked into. Lastly, I also want to say that we need to digitize and make sure that our borrowing is digital.
Why should you have it on 1 minute? Why? Why? Okay, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was saying that because all the itemized loans that we have, we need to actually integrate them into the financial systems so that even as we procure for loans, and I want to allow what the member for Marakwet is said, it has to be public, it has to be public procured. No loan should actually be procured by 2 or 3 people in the National Treasury and agreed upon without understanding the consequences and the risks involved in it. So the general public has to know it, everyone has to know it, and what are the measures, how expensive or how cheaper it is for for the sake of our country. I support, Honorable Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Funyula.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. As required in the Constitution of Kenya and the PFM Act, at the commencement of any financial year before then, the National Treasury must lay before the House a public debt management strategy. Honorable Speaker, the only concern and fear we have always had, Honorable Speaker, that many times the budget, the debt management strategy that is always presented in the House here might end up just being an empty ritual, just a matter to placate the provisions of the law and to make people, Kenyans, believe that the government is serious about managing debt, which has never been the case. Honorable Speaker, how does debt arise? It's a very simple. You budget what you want to spend, you look at the revenues you have or you can collect, the deficit you have to borrow. It therefore then means, Honorable Speaker, that as a country, we are living beyond our means. We are living beyond our means because if our revenue threshold is this level, we should make all attempts, Honorable Speaker, to then undertake programs and projects that are within our means. Granted, in a private sector, debt is always cheaper than equity. But in public sector, it's the reverse. Debt is more expensive than locally generated revenue. So, Honorable Speaker, if you look at the report presented by the Liaison Committee, this is what it reads. Under paragraph 8, a review of the implementation of medium-term management strategies since the year 2020 revealed that there has been a consistent deviation from the approved debt management strategy in the actual borrowing. So, Honorable Speaker, it means two things. One, the treasured mandarins just bring the document to this House for the sake of it, to comply with the law. Secondly, they deliberately mislead the House, knowing they are not unlikely to achieve, so they can benefit some local banks and some international donors or lenders for their own personal need. So therefore, Honorable Speaker, the country suffers due to incompetencies, ineptitudeness, or basic greed of the people who are in charge at the department. Honorable Speaker, in the financial year 2023-2024, the actual ratio...
No, Meli, the member of Funyula is making his... What is out of order?
Honorable Speaker, when he was speaking, I did not interrupt him, yet he was saying so many things I didn't add.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, the member of Funyula is completely out of order in the sense that, Mr. Speaker, the fact that this paper has been prepared adequately well, and we've given timelines in which the National Treasury is supposed to make sure that they adhere to what we are saying as a liaison committee on the medium-term debt strategy. Then the member is just saying it is lies, it is for the sake of the others, yet we are waiting. If they will not comply with it, he's out of order because he's actually giving false lies that this paper is for the sake of the donors.
Yes. And he'll debate using his own words, not yours.
Yes.
Go ahead. He's debating and he'll debate.
Honorable Speaker, Honorable Medley says he sits in the Liaison Committee. The report is here. What I'm reading here is what they have actually commented in paragraph 8. It's not my own making. It's not my words. Unless you signed a report you didn't read. Honorable Speaker, how is that possible? Honorable Speaker, and they're saying, Honorable Speaker, in this report, again, our debt ratio to GDP is already at 63%, yet the PFM Act says 55 plus 5. So, Honorable Speaker, are we dealing with illegality here? Is the committee responsible dealing with illegality here, sanitizing the illegality here? Are they just coming to Parliament for the sake of sanitizing illegality? Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, even the report gives a very dim view of the prospects in the future. They say the primary drive of the rising debt stock is the persistent fiscal deficit, influenced by significant infrastructure development needs, increasing debt servicing costs, and exchange rate fluctuations. So, Honorable Speaker, I would have really expected the committee would have gone out of their way to synthesize, discuss, and explain to us how do they...
The member for Segich wants to inform you. Do you want information?
No, I don't want to be informed unless it's a point of order, Chair. Honorable Speaker. You see, the power to be informed and the standing order lies with me to accept or not. Unless it's a point of order, then it should be in order, but not point of information.
Okay, go ahead.
Honorable Speaker.
We'll allow the Honorable Member for Vunyula to finish his.
Yes, we'll have to. Honorable Speaker, I hope you will account for the interruptions that I'm given my points to conclude. Honorable Speaker, the issue of public debt in this country has been at the forefront of the discussion for long. And the truth of the matter, Honorable Speaker, public debt in this country is deliberately understated. That's the truth of the matter. Honorable Speaker, even if you went to any office and asked, give me a schedule or a register of public debt, nobody knows. I sit in Public Accounts Committee, and some of these things that come up will shock you, Honorable Speaker. So indeed, that's why I'm praying to bring the point that probably this document, we need to have a different paradigm shift, how we are going to develop it, discuss it, and make it a document that can guide discussion in this House. Honorable Speaker, in the current financial year, the 2025-2026, the deficit is about 831 billion. Again, how would you have a deficit? It's almost a third of your budget. What kind of budgeting is this? Honorable Speaker, domestic will be about 540 billion, external 290 billion. Yet again, Honorable Speaker, when you look at this, they're not so sure they're going to borrow that money because many times they have failed to achieve that balance and have ended up borrowing domestically. Honorable Speaker, as we talk about this, we are forgetting the issue of pending bills. It is extremely unfair. It's extremely undeserving. It's extremely unfair to the people of Kenya to fail to account pending bills as part of public debt. It is a public debt. Yet the strategy paper here that has no mention at all about pending bills. Are we being sincere and truthful to the people of Kenya? We are not. This Kenya Kwanza government, Honorable Speaker, the debt that we have, Honorable Speaker, we could actually liquidate it using our own resources. Honorable Speaker, we hold Harambes to do irrelevant things, yet we cannot hold Harambes to meet our development needs. Are we sincere to the people of Kenya, or just a rip-off to make sure the people of Kenya remain in abject poverty and there's no development at all? With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support because it's required by the law, but with reservations.
Thank you. Member for Endebess. The Honorable Bai, you just walked in. He's been
Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Since we started.
I stand, Honorable Speaker. I stand, Honorable Speaker, to support the Liaison Committee consideration of the 2025 medium-term debt management strategy as laid in the House. Honorable Speaker, when you look at this debt management strategy, we talk about external borrowing as being relatively cheaper than domestic debt. And this is due to the share of concessional loans from multilateral lenders, such as the World Bank and our development partners. Indeed, 54% of the total external debt portfolio is concessional and significantly contributes to the sustainability of the Kenya's debt. Honorable Speaker, my colleague, Honorable Undo, is misled the public that you can do Harambes to pay external debts. I think that there is no country that has ever done a Harambe to pay an external debt. And I think that was just, I presume from somebody of his caliber, that was just a joke. I think he must have said it in a light touch. Honorable Speaker, there is no country in the world that does not borrow. Japan, US, any other of the developed countries, all countries borrow and they have debts. In our view, Honorable Speaker, we noted that the external commercial borrowing is relatively expensive compared to the concessional loans, as I have already mentioned. And therefore, various risk measures, including paying off of some of the most expensive loans and exploring cheaper debt instruments, such as green bonds or are being considered in this report. Following the review of the 2025 MDDS, the committee observed that the government will borrow 831.1 billion, which is equivalent to the fiscal deficit in the 2025 budget policy statement. This amount borrowed, Honorable Speaker, will be sourced from both domestic and external sources at a ratio of 65-35 respectively. Honorable Speaker, to mitigate growing risk of domestic debt interest payments and reduce the tendency of the government borrowing funds held by public entities, the National Treasury should deploy the Treasury single account for all MDS, parastatals, and public funds as being put by various members who have spoken, among them the Deputy Speaker who moved this motion, Honorable Majority Leader also said the same, and even the members of the Budget Committee, the Honorable Makali Muli, he's also stressed this issue of single treasury account. And I think this is the direction in which we should be able to go. As we speak, Honorable Speaker, from the control of budget yesterday, who said she had been in Tanzania. Tanzania is already using it. And so I think it's a high time as a country that we also deploy the same. And members having raised issues about transparency and accountability in the domestic borrowing, Honorable Speaker, I think the committee has already made some recommendations, among them that the Cabinet Secretary of National Treasury and Economic Planning should form a working committee to establish criteria for assessing the effective utilization of borrowed funds by ministries, departments, and agencies to establish the registrar of government securities pursuant to Section 55 of the PFM Act. And secondly, to record the debt in the register, the details on the utilization of the borrowed funds, including the set of projects funded from the proceeds of infrastructure bonds and any other bond, that so that to make it much easier for people to be able to can look at the register and be able to access that information. With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support.
The member for Kitui Rural. Honorable Mboni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me say on the outset, I support the report. And Mr. Speaker, this is the second one, I think, in this parliament since this parliament started. And it's very good that we actually know what is our debt stock. Debt is not a bad thing. No country has ever developed without borrowing. You realize that developing countries are more indebted than developing countries, with Japan having the highest debt to GDP at present value of 256. US is at 123% of GDP at present value. And most of the countries, developing countries, are below 100. But they cry more because the loans they took, either they are expensive, and also the way they utilize the loans. Most of the loans went to wastage. And therefore, paying becomes a problem. Mr. Speaker, going forward, the loans which we should take from this country should go into projects or programs with high economic and social returns, so that it becomes easier for us to pay because of the impact they are going to bring to this country. Mr. Speaker, looking at the report, one thing which is worrying is the Kenya loans mix. When you talk about domestic loan in this country, is 65% from the report, and external is at 5%. Mr. Speaker, domestic loans have their own effects, a very serious effect. One, the interest rates are very high. Two, their repayment period is very short. Most of them are 5 years or that kind of thing. And the more critical thing is that they crowd out private sector borrowing. Now, if the rates, for example, last year, the rates, the treasury bonds, the rates were around 20%, 16, 18%. And if you go to the bank because of that, the banks will increase their interest rates because it's easier, there is less risk borrowing from government than private sector. Banks giving to government than private sector. And therefore, they increase their interest rates. When they increase their interest rates, the bank cannot borrow, they cannot invest, they cannot expand their businesses or start up their businesses. And that has a serious effect on economic growth. Mr. Speaker, we need to move to more concession loans, which are have low interest rates and long repayment periods, so that at least we can benefit from the loan and desist from borrowing. Mr. Speaker, how did we find ourselves in this situation? One thing is the way we do our budgets. We have always having a budget with high deficits. The moment this parliament approves a budget with a deficit, you are already approving borrowing because the deficit has to be financed. So we need to move, and the deficit stands around 17% of our budget. So we need to move more to balanced budgets so that we reduce our borrowing. The other thing we need to do is to reduce the use of Article 223. These are provisions in financial management, which are a little bit misused by Mandarin's treasury. You realize that every year we are spending on this article, using this article, between 100 and 200 billion per year. You know, this is money which is not budgeted. And immediately you spend that kind of money, you are also affecting the projects which are budgeted for. Mr. Speaker, it's a pity that some withdrawals on debt payment are done manually. Last week we met with the control budget, and she was saying that she's approving 115 payments, debt payment every month, every week. And some of them are done manually. And she has not really time to go through all those payments. So I think it's important for this recommendation that is to actually automate withdrawal of debts so that at least we can have we increase our accountability on debt repayment. Mr. Speaker, the other thing is fiscal consolidation. This is a song which I've sung for so many years, and it's high time we strictly follow fiscal.
30 seconds.
It's high time we strictly implement fiscal consultation so that we can reduce unnecessary trips, hospitalities, which are in our budgets, and general wastage, which we have been facing. Mr. Speaker, the single treasury account of our FDS. I was reading somewhere last week, and the money which we are collecting for affordable housing, that money, affordable housing, it has earned 2 billion shillings from government securities. You know, because if we have fiscal, this single treasury account, the government is going to have money to use without paying interest. So this is something which we need really to implement, and the treasury should not actually be telling us when they are going to be. Implementation should have been yesterday, not even today.
Thank you. Member for Cliffy North.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, that you give me this opportunity to contribute to the medium-term debt management strategy. One, Honorable Speaker, it's high time that this country implements the single treasury account. That way, we are assured that government money is government money and we do not have to pay interest on it. First, Honorable Speaker, there are times when you have government actually borrows its own money, where you have money scattered in different banks. Government goes out there, say they want a loan, and what the bank does is just accumulate government money, gives it to government, and then charges interest on it. And that's how we continue to grow the debt in this country. So it is very important that we implement the single treasury account to avoid the situation where we are actually banks. By the way, if you look at domestic debt versus external debt today, the domestic debt is higher. But if you ask yourself, who is actually and banks are making exorbitant
profits, and you ask yourself, these profits where, while other Kenyans don't have money and there's little borrowing in the country, but actually you hear a bank has made a profit of 14 billion, and you ask yourself why? Because they have been using government. It's actually government giving them those exorbitant profits, and yet those profits that they're declaring is actually government money that they have used to loan out to government to make more money from government.